I am Wilma Balkin-Siegel, a medical doctor and an artist, creator of the Holocaust Survivors and Liberators series of portraits. Contemplating why I am doing this series, besides the very necessity for the world to know the record of the last of the generation who lived through the devastation spewed forth by Hitler, I remembered my own history when I was growing up in this country. My father and mother were born in Kiev, Russia, and escaped to the United States of America from the pogroms spawned by anti-Semitism. When I was a young girl, my father made me listen to the Yiddish programs broadcasted during World War II. I don't know Yiddish, but I think I understood what was being said. My father said to me, "This is history, and you must know history." We lived in an anti-Semitic neighborhood. In fact, the head of the local Nazi party lived across the street. I had stones thrown at me and was called Dirty Jew. Upon the liberation of the concentration camps in 1945, the movie theaters were showing the pictures of the horrors that took place within them, and my father insisted that I go to see them. I was about 8 years old. Horrified, I turned to my father and asked, why could I have not done something about this? So you see, I am playing out my guilt and trying to do something about this terrible problem of bigotry in our world. Hopefully, these remarkable people of my Holocaust survivors and liberators can help all of us think about our purpose in this world, of stamping out bigotry since we are a country of freedom.
Aaron Stern. I was born on May 20th, 1918 in Bayerstedt, Kreis Helmstedt, Germany. During the Nazi Party's rise to power my family, and I returned to Plock, Poland, where I attended the gymnasium upon graduation. I entered Warsaw University, where I studied psychology for a year. The German conquest of Poland forced me, in 1940, into the Warsaw Ghetto, where I met my future wife, Bella, a nurse. At the end of 1942, Bella and I fled the ghetto because the risk of being apprehended was considerably less when one was alone. We parted company. Soon thereafter, I was arrested and shipped to a concentration camp. I jumped from the moving train and hid in the forest for several months. I solemnly pledged that if I survive this Holocaust, I shall devote my life to advance peace and understanding among people. Exhausted, I entered a farm and offered my service in exchange for shelter and food. The farmer, suspecting that I was a Jew, demanded hard labor of me. Bella, whose appearance was Polish, likewise found a farmer, who treated her better than mine treated me, in exchange for labor. At the end of the war, we found each other again. The search for relatives was futile. All had been killed by the Nazis. In an attempt to reach Israel, we left Poland but were unable to reach our destination. Instead, we landed in the Bad Reichenhall displaced person camp in Germany. In 1949, an affidavit issued by my uncle brought us to the United States. Soon after our arrival, I developed an intermittent swelling, which was diagnosed as cancer of the jaw. With the aid of Albert Einstein, I was admitted to the Mayo Clinic, where a 10-stage surgery reconstructed my jaw. Soon afterward, our daughter, Edith, was born. At that time, I held a press conference in the hospital where I proudly announced to the few reporters that I will mold my daughter into a genius. Due to my disability, I devoted all my time to Edith. Edith, who did not attend school to the dismay of the school authorities and her mother, was admitted at age 10 to Dade Junior College. At 15, she became the youngest university instructor in recorded history at Michigan State University, where she taught higher mathematics. Today, Edith works for IBM in an important research position. She has produced 45 major patented inventions. I authored 3 books based on my work with Edith: The Making of a Genius, The Joy of Learning, and The Naked Truth, Observations of an Iconoclast. All 3 books were nominated for the Pulitzer Prize. In addition to the University of Warsaw Aaron attended Brooklyn College as well as the Jewish Theological Seminary and the Graduate Division of Columbia University, both in New York City. His research was recognized by a congressional resolution, Nobel Prize nomination, and an invitation to the White House. Aaron has delivered lectures about his educational methods at leading universities in the United States and abroad. Aby Morgenstern. I was born in Chortkov, Poland, on the Russian border. Before World War I, my mother's family immigrated to America, Israel and Turkey during the pogroms, and then moved to Poland. My father was a grain merchant by trade, and politically a Zionist. When anti-Semitism became apparent, my mother tried to move our family to Istanbul, where her sister's family lived. But my father, by various means, kept us in Poland. Then my father, the most religious among us, was killed. Chortkov became a work camp for the Jews. Ghetto life became harder and harder, and many were relocated or possibly sent to death camps. The Polish people hid others and were paid for their services. My mother and I were sent to work Camp Swidowa, then on to Ulaskovce. Ultimately, the town of Chortkov was cleared of all Jews. When the Russians came in to try to liberate Poland, the small group I was with hid in a cave for 10 days. A Russian battalion under the leadership of a Jewish officer liberated us and in March 1944 brought us back to Chortkov, 1 week after it had been liberated. However, the Germans began a new offensive and we were forced to flee again. My mother and I first followed the Russian army, and then with a friend named Dalo, I traveled by Wits through Eastern Europe and finally to Italy. Throughout the Holocaust, I carried an affidavit from the 1930s to start immigration to America, but the address on the document was unreadable. Eventually, a friend deciphered the note and found the correct number of an Aunt Fruma. New affidavits were issued, and both my mother and I immigrated to America. I met my wife, Frances, whose father originated in Jerusalem. We got married, and life changed immediately for the positive. We have 2 daughters, 6 grandchildren, and a great-granddaughter. I support a Holocaust program here in the United States. Abba has written a book entitled Chortkov Remembered, The Annihilation of a Jewish Community. He testified against the Gestapo who killed the Jews of Chortkov, and his testimony was responsible for imprisonment of those Germans who were in charge. Dr. Siegel did the portrait of him looking at a photograph of Jerusalem.
Adele Judas, born in Antwerp, Belgium. I was born in Antwerp, Belgium, and was still very young when Germans occupied our country. Between 1940 and 1943, my family was sent off to several concentration camps in France. But in 1943, through the Œuvre de Secours aux Enfants, Children's Aid Society, or OSE, my sister, brother, and I were smuggled into Switzerland, where we lived for the remainder of the war. My parents were sent to Rivesaltes, where my father survived because of his profession as a master carpenter, and my mother was put to work in the camp's kitchen. Our whole family was reunited after the liberation and returned to Antwerp, but everything was totally destroyed. My sister still lives in Antwerp since she was married, but the rest of our family came to the United States. I was only 3 years old when all this began, and I remember very little, but still feel that the silence from my experience has affected my family. My husband was also a hidden child in a French concentration camp. He was the only survivor of his family, and it has taken him all these years to recover. He was invited back to Freiburg, Germany, at the request of a high school history teacher. Between the years 1936 and 1940, Jews were not allowed to attend school, but Freiburg was a town that opened its high school, giving 2 classrooms to the Jews for schooling. This teacher wanted to know what had happened to the people who were in the class. My husband wrote a very moving speech for this occasion. It was a healing experience for him and also for me. Adele and her husband were recognized as honorary citizens of Freiburg and returned in January 2005 for a ceremony.
Alex Moskovich, born in Sobranec, Czechoslovakia. I was born in 1931 in Sobranec, Czechoslovakia, in what is now the Slovak Republic. I lived there with my parents and 2 brothers. In 1940, the Hungarian army occupied Sobrance. However, the German army occupied Hungary in the early spring of 1944. With Adolf Eichmann being dispatched to Hungary, our lives were turned around. After 6 weeks in a brick factory, we were sent to Auschwitz-Birkenau, where during a selection by Josef Mengele, our family was divided up. I stayed on in Birkenau until January 18, 1945, and was sent on a death march to Gliwice, Poland. There, I was reunited with my father and older brother. From Gliwice, we continued on open coal cars and arrived in Buchenwald in the middle of February 1945. Joseph, my father, died in the middle of March 1945, and my brother died in April on a death march. I was liberated on April 11, 1945. When I returned to Sobrance, I was the only survivor of 41 family members who were sent to Birkenau. I arrived in the United States on July 3, 1946, and continued my education. I had a long, fulfilling career with ABC Sports in Manhattan. My wife Jo and I have 2 sons and 3 grandchildren. After his retirement and relocation to Florida, Alex became active in Holocaust education and various Holocaust-related issues. Alex Moskovich, born in Sobrance, Czechoslovakia. I was born in 1931 in Sobrance, Czechoslovakia, in what is now the Slovak Republic. I lived there with my parents and 2 brothers. In 1940, the Hungarian army occupied Sobrance. However, the German army occupied Hungary in the early spring of 1944. With Adolf Eichmann being dispatched to Hungary, our lives were turned around. After 6 weeks in a brick factory, we were sent to Auschwitz-Birkenau, where during a selection by Josef Mengele, our family was divided up. I stayed on in Birkenau until January 18, 1945, and was sent on a death march to Gliwice, Poland. There, I was reunited with my father and older brother. From Gliwice, we continued on open coal cars and arrived in Buchenwald in the middle of February 1945. Joseph, my father, died in the middle of March 1945, and my brother died in April on a death march. I was liberated on April 11, 1945. When I returned to Sobrance, I was the only survivor of 41 family members who were sent to Birkenau. I arrived in the United States on July 3, 1946, and continued my education. I had a long, fulfilling career with ABC Sports in Manhattan. My wife Jo and I have 2 sons and 3 grandchildren. After his retirement and relocation to Florida, Alex became active in Holocaust education and various Holocaust-related issues. Andy Hartman, born in Eastern Slovak Republic. I was raised in a tiny village in Eastern Slovak Republic. My father, of Austro-Hungarian origin, was a farmer. My mother was Hungarian, and I had 3 older sisters. During the Nazi occupation, we were subjected to the Nuremberg laws of anti-Semitism. I was required to wear the yellow star. Since my father, being a farmer, was considered an essential person, initially we were not deported. But one day when I was 7 years old, one of my older sisters was deported to death camp. The Nazis suddenly rounded up some families, including my parents. My oldest sister and her boyfriend had been hiding in the forest, and they grabbed me. The boyfriend was an architect. Though we hid diligently, the Nazis combed the forest and rounded up all the Jews they could find. Only 7 of us escaped them. We 7 kept together by digging a hole and hiding there. The boyfriend, using his architectural background, was clever enough to cover over the hole. He also realized, however, that we could not stay there during the winter. He approached a farmer couple in the middle of the night. This couple was sympathetic and was brave enough to give us food. Finally, he convinced them to dig a hole in their barn and hide us there. During the night, the men dug the hole and returned to the forest with supplies. The 7 of us moved under darkness of night, though I had to be carried. After months of hiding, my legs had atrophied, and one found that I was too weak to walk. We hid in this barn hole for 7 months. I will never forget the red star of the Russian soldier that liberated us in April 1945. Andy's father's brother had immigrated to the United States, and so he brought Andy and subsequently his sister and her husband to live here. Andy did well in Brooklyn and worked for Burroughs' Wellcome anti-cancer drug division, although he wished to forget. 38 years later, he realized the need to give his story to the world. He has been part of Shoah Foundation and the Hidden Children organization. He repeats a story about his first encounter with America by going to Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade and feeling the joy and freedom of this nation. The contrast was stark. His only experience previously with parades was rigid military marching. He believes he survived by luck. His brother-in-law was responsible for the honor of righteous Gentiles in the righteous among the nation's path at Yad Vashem. This award was given to the couple who saved all their lives.
Annie Wertman Bleiberg, born in Oleszyce, Poland. My name is Annie Wertman Bleiberg, and I am a Holocaust survivor. I was born in a small town, Oleszyce, in Poland, and moved with my parents and younger sister, Helen, to a large city, Yaroslavl, when I was 12 years old. I am a graduate of a business high school, Gymnasium Kupiecki. When the war broke out in 1939, Hitler divided Poland between Germany and the Soviet Union. Yaroslavl was on the newly created border, and all the Jews in Yaroslavl and the surrounding vicinity were expelled to the Russian-occupied part of Poland. My family and I returned to Oleszyce, where my grandfather lived, and we stayed there for almost 2 years. In October 1942, the Jews of Oleszyce were forced to go to the ghetto Lubazov. In January 1943, we were deported from the ghetto to the death camp Belzec, where I lost my entire family. I did not want to die, and therefore my father and I took a chance and jumped from the Bezek-bound moving train. I found my way back to Oleszyce, and thanks to some very courageous Gentile friends, I got Aryan papers to work in Germany as a Polish peasant girl. Unfortunately, on the train to Germany, a former classmate from Yaroslavl spotted me, and I was removed from the train and taken to the Krakow police station. From there, I was sent to the Ordnungsdienst jail in the Krakower ghetto. About 4 weeks later, when the Krakower ghetto was liquidated, I was sent to Auschwitz-Birkenau. At Auschwitz, I was tattooed with a number and inverted triangle to mark me as a Jewish criminal for trying to escape on falsified papers. I was an inmate in Auschwitz from March 1943 until November 1944. I experienced the horrors of life in Auschwitz and witnessed the flames of the crematoria in Birkenau, spewing the remains of my people. When Auschwitz was starting to be liquidated, I was sent to a work camp, Marisch Weisswasser, in Czechoslovakia, and was liberated in May 1945 by the Russian army. From Prague, I returned to Poland to find that only my father, Isak Werman, and a neighbor, David Bleiberg, had survived. I married David and then came to the United States via Germany in September 1950. Our daughter, Suzanne, was born in Bayreuth, Germany. I am the proud grandmother of Lisa, David, and Stephen Sepperson. At the height of my career, I was a comptroller for a large manufacturer in New York City. After 50 years, I returned to Oleszyce and Yaroslavl and found 2 people who helped me survive. We had a very emotional reunion. Now Helka Fiutowska Piestrak and Witold Matzak are listed as righteous Christians at Yad Vashem in Israel. I am pleased to tell the story of my triumph over Hitler and the racist anti-Semitism of the Nazis at the Glen Cove Holocaust Museum and Educational Center and at schools, colleges, and community groups in the New York area as a way of perpetuating the memory of the martyrs of the Holocaust. In my portrait by Dr. Siegel, I am surrounded by photographs of my wedding portrait, my present family, speaking at a Holocaust presentation, a Hebrew lithograph, an oil painting of a Bavarian man, photographs of myself at the entrance to Oleszyce, and a house there, and my birth family. The painting of the old man, which I bought in Germany, reminds me of my grandfather Michael. His eyes, nose, and beard are identical. While in hiding, after escaping Zek, I had a dream about him, and he commanded me to remain on Earth and to live. The lithograph is in Hebrew saying, "It is always a mitzvah to share a simcha. Happy occasions are the blessings of a fulfilled life."
Benno Lindenberg, born in Dortmund, Germany. Although my parents were Polish, I grew up in Germany, where we lived an affluent life. My father was a textile merchant, and we were religious but well assimilated into the town. In January 1933, Hitler came to power and life changed. My father, knowing of anti-Semitism from Poland, sent all of our valuable belongings to Antwerp, Belgium. My brother and I were sent to Hamburg and pretended not to be Jewish. We received papers to go to America as a family, but were stuck in Belgium with our transit papers. Life in Antwerp was good until the Germans invaded Holland and Belgium. My father and mother escaped to Paris, but my brother and I could not get through the border and remained in Antwerp. We had to move to Brussels until May 1942, when our parents went into hiding with Gentile families. Under false papers, I smuggled myself to Nice and tried to join the Free Armed Forces of Africa, but I was arrested. I was sent to a concentration camp but escaped. I was able to get my father and mother freed, and they were reunited. While in Nice, I was sheltered by 2 French women. I was arrested in Vichy and sent to prison, but escaped the Nazis again. Though I spent time as a slave laborer, I ended as an officer of the French resistance in Saint-Gilles-du-Gard. On Armistice Day, November 11, 1945, I walked the Champs-Élysées with the resistance as a captain. I was reunited with my parents in Belgium and learned that all the Lindenberg family survived. Benno met his wife in Paris, and they were married and have 2 sons and 4 grandchildren. They immigrated to the United States, where he established a men's clothing manufacturing business and was listed in Who's Who of American business. They are now retired.
Betty Ventura, born in Ośmiany, Poland. I was 10 years old when German forces entered the small village of Ośmiany where we lived. They led the Jewish men into the forest and murdered them. My father was among the dead. Taken to Lithuania by way of cattle car, I was kept there among the Jews in a temple of worship, and subsequently was sent to a work camp where I remained until its liberation by the Russians. An aunt, who was also in this camp, protected me and kept me safe, even through severe illness. My Jewish name was Basha Prusak. Following the war, I wanted to go to Israel where an uncle was in a kibbutz, but my aunt refused and wanted me to go to America instead. I eventually went to an orphanage in the Bronx. I married a shipping clerk and had 3 children, but I felt that my marriage was a failure, and we divorced after 20 years. 3 years later, I met the love of my life, an Italian man, and we married. In 1986, as I was boarding a subway, I was mugged and remained in a coma for 8 days with 3 blood clots on my brain. While in the hospital, my husband, in his despair, became a born-again Christian. I could not live with him, so once again, I divorced. Brenda Senders, born in Sarny, Poland. I was born in a small town on the border of the Ukraine and the Soviet Union. I like to think of myself as one gutsy lady. As a member of the underground, as a partisan fighter for the Russians, I fought with guns and grenades, keeping the Germans very busy. Much of the work was done in the surrounding forests where I hid. I know that I was lucky to have survived without a scratch. Since that time, even the United States government National Security Agency has sought my experience. After the war, I went to a displaced persons camp in Austria in preparation for going to Israel and married. But instead of going to Israel, I moved to the United States where I lived outside of Washington. For the past 14 years, my home has been in Florida. I fought for my life and for the decency of humanity. This should never again happen.
Dr. Pierre Chanover. During the war, I was in Gurs, one of the 23 concentration camps in France. I watched other children escape the camp by climbing under a truck and hanging onto the axle. When the Nazis entered Paris, my father, a tailor and designer, was taken away immediately. My mother and I escaped to Vichy, France, but this was taken over, and I was captured and taken to Gurs. But, like the other children I had seen, I managed to escape as well. The French underground then cared for me. Eventually, I was taken care of by a family who raised me as their son and sent me to Catholic Church. One of the priests cared for me and, until he was killed, protected me as well as a number of other children from the Germans. I returned to Paris upon liberation to discover that, though her apartment had been entirely devastated, my mother's neighbors had kept her safe. Since she was a seamstress, she worked for the Nazis as forced labor. In the background of the portrait I have placed the yellow star we were required to wear. I often speak to groups about my life. I show them my yellow star, and I bring a rutabaga, the food on which I sustained myself. But the survival skills I learned through my trials later made me an excellent soldier in the Korean War.
Francis Chernik, born in Będzin, Poland. Walter Freshman and I are from the same town of Będzin, Poland, and were reunited when, upon retirement, we both moved with our families to Boca Raton. When the Germans entered Poland, my family and I were moved all together to the ghetto and then onto Auschwitz. Dr. Joseph Mengele sent my mother and father away to their deaths. Not knowing their future and not wanting to be separated from my parents, I asked to go with them. My mother said not to argue. Ultimately, only my brother and I survived. I had a nice singing voice, so while in the work camps I sang to keep up everyone's spirit. As a result, someone kept providing food for me, which I shared with those around me, and I was saved. I was part of a death march from Reichenberg at the end, but survived this as well. Throughout this terrible time, I just kept praying to not be in the gas chambers. At liberation, I vowed never to sing again, and I have not sung in 60 years. Not only that, but for 45 years after being liberated, I was silent about my experiences. Finally, my daughter asked me to tell my story, and now I'm trying to teach others through what I have learned. I met my husband, also a survivor, who lived by working as a chauffeur for a Russian colonel. We built a life together in the United States and were successful in real estate. We have 2 daughters and 4 grandchildren. Helena Greenwald. I was born in Vienna, Poland. At the occupation by the Germans, my family was placed in the Vienna ghetto. My father died there. My mother was a surgical nurse and worked in the ghetto hospital. She was able to keep me with her during her surgical shift. She kept me hidden behind a screen in the operating room. When it became clear that the time in the ghetto was short, my mother, with the help of friends, got Aryan papers for me and arranged for a local farmer to keep me hidden on his farm. Subsequently, my mother escaped as well and hid in the woods. She would walk for many miles at night just to peek at me. The Russian army liberated us. When Poland was divided in Potsdam, my mother and I were the only survivors. From Poland, we smuggled our way to occupied Germany. We lived in a displaced persons camp in West Berlin until the blockade in 1948, and at that time moved to Frankfurt. My mother remarried in 1949. I have an older stepbrother who lives in Australia at present. I graduated from Lycée in Frankfurt and came to Columbia University for further studies. There I met my husband. We settled on Long Island. My mother remained in Germany and died in New York while visiting her children in 1970. During the years that I lived in Germany, I did not experience any anti-Semitism. Until this day, I have close contact with my non-Jewish school friends. Helena Laster, born in Poland. I was raised in Poland where I received an excellent education. This education included, among other things, becoming fluent in German. I also spoke Polish and later became fluent in Swedish. I married while living in the ghetto. I was sent to the Auschwitz death camp but survived. My husband, along with his younger brother, died on a death march from Auschwitz in January 1945. The experiences I had in the camp made me question existence, but still I knew that I must survive. I first learned of the death camps from the crazy man of Treblinka. Treblinka was a death camp where everyone was killed. Only those needed for administrative or labor purposes, emptying incoming trains of prisoners, filling outgoing trains with their belongings, working in the kitchens and so forth, were not sent to their deaths. This man arrived in our ghetto after escaping Treblinka and told us of the horrors that were happening there. He subsequently was recaptured and most likely sent to the gas chambers. I knew of Auschwitz, of Dr. Mengele, and of how he sent his prize boys to their deaths. I remember the trains, the barking dogs, and the dehumanization of each individual by the SS. I just kept hoping for the end of the war. Upon my arrival at Auschwitz, when I saw the chimney spewing flames and ashes, I knew that I had to survive and tell my story. I was moved by cattle train from Auschwitz to Reichenbach to labor for the Germans. Having lost my entire family in Auschwitz and several other camps, I was eventually liberated by the Swedish Red Cross. We were taken on trains from Hamburg to Denmark and on to Sweden on the 5th of May 1945. We were quarantined in school buildings to contain the diseases we brought with us. Many died from disease and from overeating. The Red Cross didn't realize the degree of our malnutrition. I was temporarily paralyzed from the shock of my time in the concentration camp, and so was only able to eat slowly. This saved me. The Queen and King of Sweden came to the school where we were quarantined and shook hands with each one of us. Also, I remember when they opened the schoolyard for the first time and we were allowed to take a walk in the village, we expected to be met by machine guns. Instead, the women and children of the town met us with cases of flowers. I rehabilitated there, and there I met my second husband. Eventually, I came to the United States.
Herschel Fuchsman. He was born in Piaseczno, Poland. I was born in a small, beautiful town only 15 kilometers from Warsaw. Piaseczno had a population of about 5,000, 3,000 of them Jews. I was the first and only child-grandchild that became the apple of my extended family's eye. They showered me with affection and attention. A few weeks before the war, fearing abuse that he had heard about from passing displaced Jews from Germany, my father escaped to Białystok, on the border of Poland and Russia. When the German army invaded Piaseczno on September 1st, 1939, my mother and I found ourselves trapped in our burning building. We ran into the street only to be forced by the Germans back into the smoke-filled halls. Fortunately, a Polish soldier instructed us out of the building when he saw us crouching, afraid to go back out into the street. Being shot by a German soldier rewarded his action. I was 6 years old. We found shelter with family, but life took on unexpected demands and abuse. We were forced to clean the dead people and horses from the bombed streets. Hardships of life became a daily ordeal. After 5 months under the Nazi occupation, my father sent a messenger to bring my mother and me across to Białystok. With many difficulties and dangers from bombings, strafing, and being arrested, we crossed the border and were met by my father, who brought with him a big loaf of bread. My brother was born in Russia, where life had its own dangers. Disease, hunger, and communist scrutiny of foreigners were common. Białystok was overrun with refugees. People were arrested in the middle of the night and never heard from again. My father was one of these. We lost track of what became of him and do not know whether he survived or perished. In the meantime, because of the harsh life in Białystok, my mother applied to return to Poland. The officials agreed to send us back home, but instead we were sent off into the deep taiga Siberian forests. Out of the 100 families that were sent to this place, called Komi SSR, only 8 families and 2 children survived. We endured 18 months of slave labor before being given permission to leave in 1942. We went to Bagish, Russia, where the Enders Polish army was being formed. There, my mother remarried, and this new family of 6 survived the adversity and privation and uncertainties of life under the communist order. When the war ended, Polish citizens were permitted to return to Poland. We traveled in cattle cars for weeks heading home. We were met there with jeers and shouting for Jews to go to Palestine. Most of our extended family had been murdered, and so we agreed to be transported to Stettin, the gathering place for survivors. Life was dangerous here, and the future looked grim at the hands of the Poles, So I, along with many survivors, was smuggled by the Israeli Haganah across into the British zone of Germany. At the Bergen-Belsen displaced persons camp, I attended ORT school in Cheddar. In 1951, Herschel and his family came to Chicago, where they established a life. He worked for Allstate Insurance Company as an agent and earned considerable recognition for his good work and dedication to both the company and his clients. Herschel married Zelda Marble in 1954. They have 2 daughters and 2 granddaughters. In addition to surviving the war in 1990, he and his family confronted the struggle of breast cancer. For the past 8 years, Herschel and his wife have lived in Florida and are active with the Child Survivors Hidden Children's Group. These groups tell their stories to schools in order to teach the truth and keep the memory of the Holocaust alive. Howard Quick, born in Coney Island, New York. I was a liberator who, unexpectedly, was one of the first American GLs to enter Buchenwald. I came from an Orthodox Jewish family and was raised in Coney Island. As a member of the Combat Engineer Battalion, I was trained in demolition, specializing in mines and booby traps. When in Germany, while waiting for a vehicle to take me to company headquarters, I mistakenly got into the wrong Jeep, and the driver and I found ourselves outside the gates of Buchenwald. The source of the stench we had endured for the past 5 days was now apparent. The gates were not locked, and several other girls and I were confronted by a field littered with scores and scores of bodies. Walking among them were barely alive, walking skeletons with hollow faces and sunken eyes. There were huge flatbed wagons, each piled high with 80 to 100 bodies awaiting disposal. Several inmates dragged a Kappa, a fellow Jew who collaborated with the Germans, up to me and the group of GLs standing nearby. A mob of inmates had gathered around us demanding that the Kappa be given to them. To this day, I still feel the guilt of permitting that killing. While walking among the dead and still dying, I swore an oath that if I were lucky enough to survive and make it home, I would never allow that horror to be forgotten. I have honored that oath. Having carried a camera all through my army days, I took 22 photographs of the horrors I saw. Those photographs and the original film are now in the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. As a many-time volunteer for Israel, I have served with both Israel's army and her navy. I still carry 2 of my most precious and prized possessions, my American GL dog tag and my Israeli Tiasahal dog tag. Ilona and Manek, David Verdiger, born in Poland. Ilona said, "I have learned that knowledge and intelligence are virtues if applied in the right direction, but meaningless if not motivated by a love of humanity." The Nazis were the most educated people of that generation, but were without justice and compassion. They were ethically retarded. I hope that our second generation will use their knowledge for the betterment of humanity, to teach people how to live in peace, to care for and respect each other, and will carry the torch of progress toward understanding and love to make sure that the history of the Holocaust never repeats itself. David said, "Anti-Semitism, which has been with us for 6,000 years, as well as prejudice against blacks and other minorities, represents the worst aspect of human nature. That prejudice could manifest itself into the reality of the Holocaust must give us pause and make us look at ourselves. Prejudice still exists today in many forms against many people. It is essential to eradicate prejudice, and it must start with teaching the evils of discrimination and the necessity of growing to understand and accept all people, though different from ourselves. Educating against prejudice should be one of our priorities, as the horror of the Holocaust so vividly teaches us. We must always cherish and be grateful for our democratic way of life, Yet at the same time, we must be vigilant and watchful to ensure the continued strength of justice and freedom that is provided by our system of government.
Inge Gorovich was born in a suburb of Breslau, Germany, and had a busy childhood. In 1934, I spent a summer at a Jewish camp in England, and there met the camp's treasurer, Mr. Alex Levy. This event later saved my life. When I returned from camp, Jewish life had deteriorated, and my family had to relocate into the old city of Breslau, into a building overcrowded with other Jewish families, a sort of open ghetto. After Kristallnacht, my father was taken away to Buchenwald. My older brother Walter married, and while en route to Shanghai, was asked to stay in Manila in the Philippines to serve as an interpreter for refugees. In Manila, he was able to obtain one visa that was used for my father, and together with a ransom, freed him from Buchenwald. He left for Manila, and I never saw my father again. When England opened her doors to 10,000 Jewish children, the Kindertransport was born. I was rejected for this. In Germany, I had no way of getting the necessary sponsor in England. In desperation, my mother accepted a temporary visa for America. The United States wanted no more refugees, so I had to stay behind to ensure my mother's return. In New York, a kind stranger sheltered my mother and contacted the English camp that I had visited in 1934, and they agreed to sponsor me. After a 6-month wait, I boarded one of the last transports along with 200 other children. En route, the children were harassed and intimidated by the Nazi escorts. However, when we reached the border of Holland, the Nazis had to leave. A group of Dutch ladies welcomed the children with cookies, milk, and a hard-boiled egg. These were luxuries some of the children had never tasted. I was 14 years old when I went to England. Soon after, my mother joined my father and brother in Manila with the hope that I would join them. When the summer camp closed in August 1939, Mr. Levy and his wife agreed to sponsor me further until my travel permits for Manila arrived. But the war intervened, and I remained with the Levy family, which included an older son and younger daughter. My own family was trapped in Manila under terrible conditions created by the Japanese occupation. After high school, I became a registered nurse and met my American husband, Hai, at the Levy's home. Eventually, I left my beloved English family for a life in New York. My husband and I raised 2 sons, and Elle resumed my nursing career and published many professional articles and books before my retirement in 1996. Ingrid Roskin, born in The Hague, Netherlands. I was one of the hidden children of the Holocaust. My mother moved from Germany to Holland when she married my father. I was born in The Hague and our family relocated to Leiden. We moved into a boarding house that my grandparents owned. One night in Leiden, the Germans arrested my father. My mother was allowed to visit him in prison. My father was transported to Mauthausen in Austria. He died there in the mines. Neighbors told my mother that we must go into hiding or risk being deported. One of these neighbors, a Jewish woman, became a major figure in the resistance. Another also became a resistance fighter, though she was Gentile. Both have been honored. Included in the portrait background are the people who saved me and the ones who cared for me. My family was kept in hiding, separately moving from place to place and not seeing each other. I was sent to live with a Catholic family in the countryside. They disguised me as a Catholic, but I continued to say the Jewish prayers I knew in silence. After the war, my mother established a boarding house in Leiden, and we moved to Miami in 1953 to keep the family together. Israel was not a choice, as my sister would have had to go into the army after 6 months, thereby splitting the family again. My survival was due to the goodness of the Dutch people. Most Dutch were very anti-Hitler. They felt it was their duty to take care of the oppressed people. The Dutch heritage is one of democracy and humanism. Isabel Choco, born in Lodz, Poland. I was born in Lodz, Poland, where at the age of 11, my family was moved into the ghetto. Included in my portrait is a photo of the ghetto group. From there, I was taken to Auschwitz. My parents, both of whom were pharmacists, were affluent. They owned several pharmacies in Lodz. My father died of deprivation and illness in the ghetto. My mother and I survived working in a work camp for the railroad. I remember so well how difficult it was for the Hungarian Jews who had been living such good lives. Suddenly, Hitler decided to decimate the population, and they could not cope. They made it so much harder for those of us who had been there for years to keep going. My mother died only a month before our liberation. I had been quite ill before the liberation, and once I was free, a nurse with the British Army, Sister Suzanne Spender, found me and nursed me back to health. I was sent to Sweden for recovery. I had an uncle who had moved to Paris prior to the war, and I left Sweden to live with him. I attended school while I was there and met my husband when I was only 17 years old. When I was 18, we married. Many years later, I met Sister Spender, and she fell to her knees to thank God that I had survived. It wasn't until 15 years ago that I began to tell my story. Now I give testimony to children and adults in France. Recently, I was the subject of an art show by an Israeli artist in Hanover, Germany. The show compared my life with the life of a German woman who lived near Bergen-Belsen while I was imprisoned there. Meeting this woman was quite traumatic for me. I am currently writing a book to be published in France entitled My Two Lives. My first life ended in Bergen-Belsen, and the second is the one I have lived since. Once I was teaching a group of adults and sharing my experience of the Holocaust. I said, "I was born at the wrong time at the wrong place." In response, a black man said to me, "No, you were born at the right time and the right place so that you could be here to do testimony to us today." Isabel's husband is a wine expert, and they have 3 sons who are very successful. They have 2 homes, one in Paris and one in Fort Lauderdale. They collect elegant Haitian art. Isabel was a French chess champion in her childhood. She has kept in touch with old schoolmates who survived from her childhood. In the background of the portrait are artworks done by children in France in response to her testimony.
Jack Rubin, born in Vary, Czechoslovakia. I was born in Vary, Czechoslovakia, which became Hungary in 1938. My parents made a very comfortable living from the department stores that they owned until 1944, when we were taken to Auschwitz. I was 15 years old. From Auschwitz, I was taken to Thiel, Alsace in Lorraine, France, to work in a copper mine for the Germans. In 1944, with the invasion of the Allies, I was brought back to Germany to work in a salt mine in Koschendorf. In March 1945, I was taken out of Koschendorf and taken on a death march to Dachau. At the end of April, I was told that I would be taken from Dachau to Switzerland by train. The train was to cross the Elbe River, but the bridge was destroyed. We were all taken off the train and walked down to the bank of the Elbe. During the night, the SS were machine gunning and people were falling into the river. After a few hours, the shooting stopped. I heard a lot of shouting and the SS soldiers started to run away. The few people who were left walked down the road, where we met with American soldiers in the town of Mittenwald. It was May 1st, 1945. I was very sick and was taken into a field hospital that was set up by the Americans. I was very grateful for all the medical treatment I received. After being in the field hospital for 2 weeks, transports were being put together to take the survivors back to their countries of origin. I was taken back to Prague, where I was reunited with my 2 surviving sisters. We returned to our hometown, which was then under Russian, Ukrainian control. Everything had been destroyed, including our home and our parents' business. We had no desire to stay, and when we heard of the displaced persons camps that were being established, we returned to Germany. I heard that some of my friends tried to go to Palestine, but were taken to Cyprus. I did not want to go to Cyprus. Right at that time, President Truman opened the quota of age of under 21 without an affidavit to go to the United States. I registered and, in August 1947, I was in this beautiful country as a free man. I was drafted into the army in 1950. After being discharged, I was in the fur business and dry cleaning business. I married in 1954 and have 3 children and 4 grandchildren. Jack retired in 1995 and relocated to Florida in 1999. Here, he became involved with the child survivor of the Holocaust group. He also was involved with the settlement of the Hungarian gold train, which he feels gave him closure.
Judith Evan Goldstein, born in Vilna, Poland, now Lithuania. I wish I was never part of World War II. It was given to me, and I was thrown into a sea of suffering. I was meant to die, but lived and survived the survival and came face to face with history. Judith Shapiro Goldstein was born in Vienna, Poland, which is now Vilnius, the capital of Lithuania. To the Jews of the world, it was known as Jerusalem of Lithuania, the Jewish cultural center of Eastern Europe. Her father, Chaim, a mechanical engineer, her mother, Yetta, a clothes designer, her brother Mir and Judith lived a comfortable and happy life. In June 1941, Nazi Germany occupied Vilna. 3 months later, the Jews were placed in a newly formed ghetto and were faced with murder and tragedy. At the young age of 7, Judith ceased to be a child. She lost her childhood forever. She grew old so quickly. After 2 years of suffering, hunger, disease, and extreme conditions, the ghetto was liquidated. Families were torn apart. Women, men, and children were separated. Most people were sent to the killing place, Ponary, a forest outside of Vilna. 100,000 people were murdered there. 70,000 were Jews. Judith and her mother were shipped to a series of concentration camps, first to Kaiserwald, Riga, Latvia, then to Stutthof and Torun, Poland. In Stutthof, she nearly lost her life because children under 13 were taken away and never seen again. In 1945, they were liberated by the Russian army in a small Polish town called Bydgoszcz. They continued to travel to Lodz, Poland, where they were reunited with her brother who had survived Camp Buchenwald. Her father did not survive. They followed the tide of the refugees to the American zone in Germany and settled in the displaced persons camp Zeilsheim. Judith's mother enrolled her in school and in the Offenbach Conservatory of Music in Frankfurt am Main. It was during those years of her childhood that she developed a strong love for the arts. In 1949, the family immigrated to New York. Judith married Harry, an Auschwitz survivor, and established a nice family. She studied music and art, and furthered her studies by specializing in music and art therapy. She holds bachelor's and master's degrees in music. Judith is an accomplished artist, composer, and lyricist. Her art is in the permanent collection of Yad Vashem, Jerusalem, the Florida Holocaust Museum of Art, St. Petersburg, Florida, and in private collections. A number of her paintings have been exhibited in 17 museums in the United States. Her art can also be seen on the internet at the University of Minnesota, Center of Holocaust Genocide Studies. Judith H. Traub. Yes, I can finally call myself a survivor, and as a survivor, it is my obligation to preserve the dignity of the dead. I was born in Zamość, Poland. LRK is my Polish name. When World War II broke out, I was 3 years old, and my parents and sister were living in a nearby town occupied by the Soviets. The rest of our large, extended family was still residing in Zamość under German occupation. One of my uncles was sent by the family to convince my parents to rejoin us in Zamość. My father requested permission from the Soviet authorities to return to the German part of Poland. He was considered disloyal, and so our immediate family was exiled to a labor camp in a remote part of Siberia. In 1943, because my father was a valued worker, we were relocated to Samarkand in the Uzbek Republic, where I started my schooling at the end of the war. In 1945, my family escaped from the Soviet Union to West Berlin, where we stayed in an American deportation camp. I learned there that the Germans had killed my entire family that had remained in Zamość. The only survivor was my uncle. When I visited Poland in 1983, I said Kaddish at Majdanek for my relatives. My parents, my sister, and I immigrated to the United States in 1951. I was educated here and became a public and Hebrew school teacher and then a librarian. My husband, who is a dentist, and I live on Long Island. We have 2 children and 5 grandchildren. Judy Freeman, born in Ungvar, Czechoslovakia. I was born in Ungvar in the Carpathian region of Czechoslovakia, which in 1938 became part of Hungary. My father was a baker, and I was assimilated into the local culture. Reading was my passion, and I had many Gentile friends. In 1944, everything changed when Germany marched into Hungary and began the deportation of the Jews. All of the Jews from my city and the entire area were rounded up and put into a ghetto. My family had no idea about the extermination camps. We were deported to Auschwitz and faced Dr. Josef Mengele, who separated me from my mother and 12-year-old sister. They were sent directly to the gas chambers upon arrival. I was 15 years old and was sent with the group of young and able-bodied women. I wanted to go with my mother, but one of the prisoners who worked at the arrival platform insisted that I stay in the group to which I was sent. This saved my life. I was assigned to Lager C in Birkenau. Each barrack housed 1,000 women. We lived on bare shelves. 8 to 10 persons shared each shelf. We had only a dress to wear. The lucky ones got to keep their shoes. I was one of the lucky ones. There were endless days with nothing to do, just starving and roll call. I filled my time by giving book reviews to my fellow prisoners, telling them the stories of the books I had read in the past. To this day, reading is still my passion. Some of the girls developed a vacant stare and lost the ability to think, but I was determined to try to keep my sanity and to stay alive in order to tell the world of the atrocities that mankind can inflict upon innocent human beings. In the fall of 1944, I was selected to be taken to the crematorium. While waiting to be gassed, a sudden air raid interrupted the killings and was marched back to my barrack, once again cheating imminent death. In November of that year, I was sent to a slave labor camp near Berlin called Guben. I worked there in an ammunition and electronic factory. The workday was long, and the factory far from the campgrounds, but I was grateful that it was indoor labor and not outside in the cold winter. When the Russian army was getting close to Berlin, we were evacuated and taken on the death march through the forests and highways of Germany. Eventually, I wound up in Bergen-Belsen, where we were crowded into barracks, lived on the floor, and were infested with lice. A typhus epidemic raged that killed thousands each day. I contracted typhus and was very sick when the British Army liberated Bergen-Belsen on April 15, 1945. After spending some time in a hospital, I returned to my hometown and found that none of my family members survived. I met my future husband, and we left together and waited 2 years in a displaced persons camp near Munich, Germany, until we were able to start a new life in America. Magda Hammer. I was born in Czechoslovakia, which later became Hungary. My family, which consisted of my parents, my 3 brothers, and me, lived in an affluent town where my father was a wine dealer. In April 1944, we were marched into a brick factory, which became the ghetto. I then was sent to Auschwitz, but a girlfriend and I escaped and were hidden in a silo. Upon liberation, we were sent to American ZDP camp. One of my brothers and I were the only family members to survive. My brother then went to Israel, but I did not want to go. Instead, an uncle brought me to America. For 50 years, I was silent about my story, but recently, when questioned by my daughter, I revealed what had happened. I participated in the March of the Living to educate children about the Holocaust. I also had the opportunity to return to Auschwitz where my mother, father, and brothers died. I said Kaddish for them.
Julius Eisenstein, born in Tomaszów Masz, Poland. I was one of 5 children born to my family in Tomaszów Masz, Poland. My father owned a bakery. I survived the Holocaust in Dachau with my brother. I chose to place in this portrait a photograph of the liberation of the camp by American soldiers. This photograph has been seen in many documentaries, including Life magazine. I tried to find the Liberator soldier next to me several years later by using the photograph. My quest was rewarded when I was reunited 48 years later with soldier Joseph Frolio. Frolio and I have often taught about the Holocaust together. Frolio is no longer living, but I have fond memories of him. I met my wife, a former Auschwitz survivor in Munich 2 years after the liberation. We came to the US, and I opened a successful bakery. It is beschert that I am alive and survived. I feel that parents teach hate. Education is a way of enlightenment, that one can understand that there is something other than hate. For the last 15 years, I have been lecturing in high schools and colleges. I tell them my story of the Holocaust, and through my story, try to teach tolerance.
Catherine Sattler. I was born in Uzhhorod, Czechoslovakia. Most of my friends were Gentile, and there was not a Jewish quarter. I had an older brother and an older sister. My mother was a housewife, and my father was in the grocery wholesale business. We lived an affluent life. When the Germans took over, all of the family was taken to Auschwitz. I was with my mother and sister the entire time we were in Auschwitz. We kept the knowledge of our family relationship from the officers, but one of them noticed the likeness. He asked my mother about it, and she admitted our relationship. She feared that if he found out otherwise, we would be put to death. His surprising response was, "I have 2 daughters also." I was assigned to go through the clothes of all who had been destroyed in the crematorium. One day, I found my father's clothes. I did not tell my family because I didn't want to destroy their hope. Finally, after liberation, I told my mother so that there would not be despair over never finding him. My sister and I felt a need to always protect my mother. We were sent on a death march from Auschwitz and survived in a small labor camp in Germany until being liberated by the Russians. My brother was in a labor camp and survived. We found him after the war with the help of the Red Cross in Prague. 2 of my mother's brothers had immigrated to Los Angeles. We were all brought to America, and life was wonderful. In my youth, I had learned to sew from my mother's couturier in Czechoslovakia. This led to employment as an assistant to Edith Head, a famous costume designer for Hollywood movies. I met my husband, and we moved to Detroit, where he was a successful businessman in commercial air conditioning. While in Detroit, I met one of my barrack mates from Auschwitz. She had given her story to Shoah.
Dr. Kurt Elias is a friend of mine from Montefiore Medical Center in the Bronx, where I spent much of my career. Dr. Elias started the psychosocial rounds in the oncology department, and I am indebted to him for teaching me this very important field. He was responsible for bringing Renee Dubas and Elizabeth Kubler-Ross to the center, and their lectures inspired me to think about hospice work and to create one of the first hospices in the United States. Kurt is a very sensitive, caring physician. One of his patients was Franklin Delano and Eleanor Roosevelt's daughter, Anna. I helped him with her terminal care. Kurt Elias. I was a subject of the Holocaust and can only contribute my survival to luck. I am the offspring of an anti-Semitic German family, the Van Arnims, and a well-connected Viennese Jewish family. My mother's father was a famous Greek scholar, represented in the background by a portrait bust. My mother, a Van Arnim, was an artist who turned to nursing, and in so doing met my father during the First World War. My father was a well-known professor of internal medicine. They married, but argued for their entire life and eventually divorced. I was in the Austrian army before Hitler marched into Vienna and did not experience anti-Semitism there. When Hitler came to Vienna, I was in medical school. Then life in Vienna fell apart, as did my own. I felt destitute. On a beautiful spring day, March 13th, 1938, I walked to the main square in Vienna. Here, in this square, stand many historical sculptures among which lilacs bloom in profusion. The entire square had the scent of lilacs. I thought, these flowers bloom and die, and then they return every year. I felt sure this was a sign that I too could survive. I turned to my mother, and through her connections we found a way for me to escape to the United States. Though I initially lived in poverty, I completed medical school, married, and had 3 successful children. I am now married to my second wife, Gloria, who is a psychiatrist. Leon Heller. Leon Heller is a Jewish liberator who has told his story to the Holocaust Documentation Center of Southeast Florida. Dr. Siegel viewed his tape with him and witnessed how very emotional these memories still are for him. I was born in Chicago to a conservative Jewish family in an assimilated neighborhood. Still, I experienced anti-Semitism as a youth. At the synagogue we attended, I was told of the atrocities going on in Europe, and we were encouraged to take care of our own and to do whatever we could to help the European Jews. I graduated from high school and then went to Wright Junior College. I was drafted into the army at age 18. My brother was already in the army in France. I wanted desperately to go to Europe, but was sent first to Texas to be part of the Tank Destroyer Battalion. I was 19 when I was sent abroad to fight on the front lines in Germany. As a private assigned to the 607th Tank Destroyer Battalion, I was part of the unit to liberate Buchenwald on April 11, 1945. When we entered camp, I vividly remember the skeletal men in stripes, joyous that the American soldiers were there bringing freedom. I spoke in Yiddish to one small man and asked about family members I knew had been taken from their homes. This man told me of how he was to carry the bodies to and from the crematorium. The captives were giving us whatever they had. I wish I had given them my clothes. I was completely unprepared for what I encountered there. The vivid memory of the bodies in the crematorium and the stench will never leave me. I was so enraged that upon entering another German town on a raid the next day, even though it was empty of Germans, I destroyed anything of theirs that I could find. 1 week later, I went to Dachau, but no victims were left. We visited the barracks and saw the horror of the spaces, including the meat hooks, the showers, and the crematorium. I returned to the United States to Roosevelt College and went into the family shoe business. I married in 1953, and we had 3 children. 2 of my children have married second-generation Holocaust survivors, and so I have been able to share my experience with my family. Why did this happen? Education is so important, but it is all difficult to express. Leon related his story with tears in his eyes. He has returned to Europe, but has no desire to return to Germany. His wife died of cancer, and he is happily remarried. He is a survivor of cancer as well. He continues to work 5 days a week, and to do as much good for Jewish causes as possible. He has been the president of his congregation, Temple Beth Israel, in the city of Sunrise several times. Lucia and Eddie Froelich, born in Stanislav, Poland. Lucia and Eddie Froelich both were born in Stanislav, Poland. Lucia's family was wealthy. They owned a leather factory. Eddie. He had been a wholesale agent for leather, and so she knew him in her youth. In 1939, the Russians took over, and the factory was confiscated. In 1941, on the Jewish holiday Shana Rabi, the Germans came to Stanislav and massacred the Jews, killing 12,000 and placing them in 3 mass graves. Those of us remaining were moved to the ghetto. In 1942, another roundup took place, and about 3,000 of us were taken to be killed. Most were to be shot. I was among 20 chosen to be killed by hanging. I was the 20th in line for hanging. The rope was around my neck when I kicked the SS officer closest to me, ran to another SS officer and asked to be shot instead. The Nazi beat me with a bayonet, but he let me go free. He said to me, "You are brave. I will let you go." My father was killed that day. I went the next day to Warsaw, took a Gentile name, and lived outside the ghetto. I worked in the underground and helped with an uprising in the ghetto. I learned of a French doctor who could erase the Jewish mark of circumcision. When I was later captured because of the surgery, I was saved from the death chamber and kept as a prisoner of war. Lucia. While these things were happening with Eddie, I was in the ghetto in Stanislav. My father was among those killed in the massacre. I was chosen by a German officer to be his housekeeper and nursemaid for his child. He helped me to get food in the ghetto which I shared. He also helped me to get papers, which allowed me to escape to Warsaw. My mother told me to try to find Eddie in the underground in Warsaw, but he was living under a new name. Fortunately, I went first to an old family acquaintance, and Eddie was there visiting. There, our romance and life involvement started. He got my mother and brought her into hiding in Warsaw. Eddie was taken as a POW and was liberated by the Americans. Lucia was taken as forced labor in Krakow and was liberated by the Russians. After the war, she was reunited with her mother and with Eddie. They had twin daughters whose photographs Dr. Siegel has included in the background of the portrait.
Magda Bader. I was born in a small town in Czechoslovakia, which later became Hungary. I was the youngest of 10 children. My father was a businessman. Life was good until I was 14, when my parents, my niece, and 4 of my sisters and I were taken to Auschwitz. My parents, one of my sisters and her baby, and my niece were immediately gassed there. Another sister, married and living in Prague, died in Theresienstadt. One of my brothers escaped to Cambridge. The other 3 brothers were sent to a labor camp, but they survived. My 3 remaining sisters and I were sent to a labor camp in Germany run by the SS. We escaped the camp thanks to a Dutch cook who told us of an opportunity to get away. We later wrote a letter for him, hoping that at the end of the war he could be saved. A few days after escaping, we met American and British soldiers who became the Liberators. These men provided us with food and shelter. Because we were not in the camp when the liberation came, we were not placed in a displaced persons camp, but worked to sustain ourselves. One sister worked as a medic for the United Nations Refugee Agency, one as a nurse, one as a social worker, and I worked as an interpreter for the British Red Cross. One sister and I went to England where I attended art school in London. I won a foreign student scholarship to Denver University. There, I received my Bachelor's of Fine Arts and got a job in Long Beach, California, where I taught 4th grade. From there, I went to Columbia University to get my master's degree in fine arts and fine arts education, and then settled in New York where I taught art to high school students. We moved to Dade County 36 years ago, and for 20 years, I taught art. I was awarded the best teacher 3 times. I was also a museum art educator. 11 years ago, I retired. Mary Brown. Dr. Siegel met Mary at a Southeast Florida Holocaust Coalition group meeting at Jewish Family Services. Mary is 2nd generation and is a leader of the Kings Point Holocaust group of Tamarack. Mary had a successful recruiting business in New Jersey, but had to move to Florida to help her mother care for her father, who has Alzheimer's. I grew up in the shadows of the Holocaust and was deeply impacted by it. Ever since I was a little girl, my parents shared with me their personal stories of the war. With few surviving relatives, our holiday meals were frequented with other Holocaust survivors, creating our own family unit. My brother Ronnie and I, the only children who knew Yiddish, often sat with the adults around the table for hours, mesmerized by their vivid and painful stories. Although my father, a survivor of the Warsaw Ghetto, had turned his back on his Chassidic background at age 16, it deeply influenced him. Throughout my life, without us realizing it, he carried out the role of the centuries-old Chassidic master storyteller, in which Ronnie and I received informal, spontaneous lessons from the Torah, Mishnah, and Talmud, as well as countless Jewish parables and Chassidic tales. After the war, my father returned to Warsaw to discover that all his family and friends had been murdered. He felt the Polish streets were steeped in Jewish blood. During this time, my mother, who had endured the war in Germany pretending to be a Christian, found her way to a DP camp and eventually met my father, an ardent Zionist and leader of a group making their way illegally to Palestine. They were captured in Cyprus, then lived in Israel for 10 years before moving to Belgium, where I was born. Eventually, they moved to the United States. Hearing first-hand survivor stories during my childhood shaped me profoundly, especially in terms of understanding good and evil, love and betrayal, respect and humiliation, survival and death, and the value of human life. Based upon these influences, I have been passionate throughout my life about making a difference, especially by helping those in need. The best way to sum up my driving force is tikkun olam, to perfect the world.
Max Motek Lewin, born in Lodz, Poland. I was born in Lodz, Poland. When the Germans came in 1940, I was taken for forced labor at a labor farm. From there, I jumped off of a truck to try to return to my family, but without proper papers, I was picked up and taken to build railroads as slave labor. I was moved to Zork for electrical line work, to Skarzisko to work in an ammunitions factory, and then to Sulejau to work on the anti-panzer Schutzgraben. I was finally at Buchenwald on a death march and was liberated May 2nd, 1945 by the United States Army. I married in 1947 in Feldafing Displaced Persons Camp, which is photographed in the background of my portrait. Max has lived here in the United States for the past 55 years. He is married and was in the restaurant business. He now lives in Florida. Mike Moshe Kalmowicz. Born the son of a kosher butcher in Kielce, Poland, it seems to me that I was raised in the most anti-Semitic city in Poland in the 30s. During my school years, I was once called a Christ killer. The principal dismissed me from the school, and I was not allowed to return. When the Germans came in 1939, I was marched off to a slave labor camp, but managed to escape and return to my family in the ghetto. My sister, father, and brother were sent to Auschwitz. While in the concentration camp, my father and brother did not talk to each other for fear that if the authorities knew they were related, one would be killed. My father did not survive, but my brother and sister did. I was sent to Treblinka, then on to Dachau, where we were liberated by the Americans. My sister survived because a member of the English aristocracy in London paid the Germans for 200 children. Those children were held in Sweden. My sister was among them. From there, she went to Argentina. I was rescued near the end of the war by a man named General Snyder. It was General Snyder who gave me the name Mike. When Golda Meir came to the deportation camp where Mike lived, Mike joined up to fight for Israel. He married Gianna Zato Zemato, and they lived in Israel for 11 years before coming to the United States. Here, they settled in Memphis, Tennessee, and brought his brother from Germany to live there as well. Mike opened a restaurant, Café Sinclair, which became very successful. Upon retiring, he moved to Florida.
Miriam Friedman. I was born in Lodz, Poland. My father was in the dairy business, which meant that we were affluent, and I attended private Jewish schools. In those days, I spent my youth in the ghetto. I can remember my hair freezing to the wall because it was so cold, and we did not have wood to burn for fire. I spent time in various concentration camps, even Auschwitz, where my job was to clean the bricks of the crematorium. On May 8, 1945, I was liberated and found my way to a displaced persons camp in Italy. A distant cousin gave me sponsorship to come to the United States. Miriam married in 1948, and her husband died in 1994. She has been honored many times for her educational work dealing with the Holocaust. By teaching about our past, we can prevent history from repeating itself. She has spoken to the Shoah Foundation. She states that it is important for Israel to survive. She became a founding member of the Holocaust survivors of Southeast Florida.
Morris Freibaum, born in Warsaw, Poland. I was born in Warsaw, Poland, where my father was in the furniture business. When the Germans came in, my entire education was stopped, and my family was put into the ghetto. I ran away from the ghetto in 1940, and 6 months later could not get back to see my family. I was on my own, and survival became hand-to-mouth. I even had typhus and survived. When the Jews were being rounded up for Auschwitz, I chose to move around among the Poles. This simple decision meant that instead of Auschwitz, I went to the workforce in Radom, Germany, where I helped to build an underground ammunitions factory. From Radom, I spent 3 days in a train moving to Auschwitz. I was moved from camp to camp throughout Germany. As the Allied bombing got closer, I was wounded by shrapnel that hit my leg. Unable to continue working, I was sent to Dachau to Block 28 and then onto the hospital where a French doctor saved my life. The wounded were released from this hospital, given a package by the Red Cross that contained civilian clothing, and loaded onto a boxcar. We were traveling through the mountains when the Americans blocked our way. The Germans unloaded us and we spent the night wandering. But in the morning, May 2nd, 1945, we were liberated by the Americans. I was chosen to work for the American Army by a sergeant who taught me to fix gasoline stoves. I came to the United States and moved to the Bronx, New York, where I became a man of all trades, a mechanic, a taxi driver, a garment worker, and a waiter. I married and had 2 daughters. I am now divorced and live in Florida permanently. I spend much of my time with the Jewish war veterans of Delray. Dr. Siegel painted me in my hat. Morris considers his survival to luck at being in the right place at the right time. He thought that there was no one left from his family, but by accident found a lost aunt on his father's side. She had moved to Paris before the Holocaust. From this aunt, he received the photographs of his family, which Dr. Siegel placed in the background of the portrait. Murray Cederman, born in New York, USA. I was of Polish-Jewish heritage. My family came to the United States during pogroms at the turn of the 20th century. I enlisted in the army in 1943 and became a medic. I also had the opportunity to work as an interpreter for General George Patton because I spoke both French and German. The company men thought Patton was an SOB, but I thought he had compassion. It was horrible for one person to make the decision over so many young people to die on a beach. The 29th Division, the 10th Armored, the 82nd and 101st Paratrooper Support Units were already in heavy combat on Omaha Beach. I arrived at Headquarters and Headquarters Detachment, 547th Quartermasters, a couple of weeks later. I was at greater risk than others because the Germans were targeting medics. I remained with the 547th and with the 3rd Army until the end of the war. I went into Dachau after the Germans had fled. The survivors greeted us in disbelief. They said to us, "Too late. Where were you?" As a medic, I immediately was put into the duty of triage. I still bear the guilt of having to decide who would live and who would die. I went to many displaced persons camps in Germany and have movie records of many liberators. I was also present at the Nuremberg war trials. Upon his return to the United States following the war, Murray demanded an education. He completed his master's and went into a PhD program, but never finished. He was a guidance counselor all his life. Then, he and his wife went on to open a daycare and a camp for children. He has 2 daughters and 1 grandchild. Interestingly, he once invented a talking camera for making home movies, but it was never marketed, and so he never got credit for his achievement. He has returned to Omaha Beach and states, "Just think of what I have lived through." The world enjoys mediocrity. To change this present condition of man striving to self-destruction through the attitude of enjoying mediocrity, my solution for the world is to promote a better communication through the discipline of better education, thus a striving toward excellence.
Nina Rusman, born in Stolin, Poland. One night, while my family was living in Kowal, the Polish-Ukrainian ghetto, my father and my brother Abraham did not come home from work. When they did not return, my mother made up a story that she was not a Jew, and neither was I, and we simply had been living with a Jewish man. I was told what to say, and by my mother's wits we survived. Because we did not look Jewish, our deceit was universally taken as the truth. My mother also lied in order to find good jobs for us, such as working in the kitchen in a restaurant. We were working as slave labor in a laundry in a town outside of Berlin, where a Nazi major general, one of the ones responsible for the deaths in the camps, also lived. Later, during the Nazi trials, this man was convicted and given life imprisonment until his death. There are two kinds of people in this world: the good, and, if you are lucky you survive, and the bad, who will send you to the crematorium. Why do we Jews suffer? For no reason, nothing has changed. The world still has hate for the Jews. Family members, who had come to the United States before the war, brought them to the United States. Nina married, but was unable to bear children. Her mother died 23 years ago. Dr. Siegel placed her mother's photograph in the painting.
Professor Hans Heilbronner, born in Bavaria, Germany. I grew up in Memmingen, Bavaria, Germany. On a single day, January 30th, 1933, life immediately changed. I went from an assimilated Jewish family life to being prevented from entering my own home by brown shirts. My father, an affluent merchant who was president of our congregation, in November 1938 was sent to Dachau. My mother, hoping for the release of my father, went to the Gestapo chief and agreed to give him 50 marks and the keys to our Mercedes in exchange for my father. In March 1939, my brother and I were sent off to Zurich, Switzerland, and spent time in the care of a Swiss organization established to save German Jewish children. At first, I was placed in a school for delinquent boys, but I ran away. A relative then found more appropriate living conditions for my brother and me, and we ended up living with a widow. That was a happy time. We knew no anti-Semitism and got to spend some of our mealtimes at a local elite boarding school for girls. Upon my father's release from Dachau, he and my mother came to find us, and in August 1939, we escaped to London. We took the last ferry that sailed from France to England. War broke out the next day. Through it all, I didn't feel as if I were suffering. Life just felt like an adventure. My parents, in order to avoid living in the ghetto, moved the family to Detroit where my mother's uncle lived. Still, our family remained poor. My father was a cookie salesman, and my mother, who had always had maids in Germany before the war began, cleaned houses. My brother and I served in the armed forces, and then, because of the GL Bill, both of us were able to get an education, and I received my PhD. Hans won a Fulbright scholarship as a Russian history scholar. He was accepted by the University of New Hampshire, but disappointingly found there an atmosphere of anti-Semitism. He describes lecturing to a local women's organization in a country club setting where no Jews were allowed. When he announced that he was Jewish, they were forced to accept him on his merit, and from then on was well respected. He maintained his Jewish heritage and is a member of the board of the synagogue. He believes his survival was pure luck. He is a positive person who believes that if you come to grips with the fact that life is tragic and the essence of existence is tragedy, everything else comes into place. His story is part of Shoah.
Regina Glinsman. My family emigrated from Czechoslovakia to Antwerp, Belgium. We were a religious Orthodox family. When the Germans invaded Belgium, my father was taken away immediately. My uncle had urged him to flee and hide. My mother tried to flee to France, and afraid of the hardship for her children, she placed my sister and me in a Belgian convent, where only the Mother Superior knew that we were Jewish. My mother tried then to escape to Switzerland. I believe she ended in Auschwitz. Subsequently, a Protestant group took care of us, and we were shuffled from place to place. My sister and I remained together always. On the day of the Battle of the Bulge, the orphanage where we were living was taken over by the Germans. We were all brought down to the cellar and hid, but we could hear the sound of the bombing. Our Liberation Day came on August 1st, 1945. We waited for our parents, but no one came. Finally, my uncle, who had fled with his family into hiding, rode his bicycle to every Belgian orphanage to find us. He found his widowed brother in America, in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and he sent us to live with him. But life here was difficult as well. Even there we experienced anti-Semitism. My uncle remarried, and our very kind stepmother cared for us and brought us up. I moved with my sister to Brooklyn and then to New Jersey, where each of us married. We lived close to one another until recently when I moved to Florida. After 50 years, she returned to Poland and saw the remains and had a horrible feeling. She's been telling her story to children for more than 30 years. Regina Glinsman. My family emigrated from Czechoslovakia to Antwerp, Belgium. We were a religious Orthodox family. When the Germans invaded Belgium, my father was taken away immediately. My uncle had urged him to flee and hide. My mother tried to flee to France, and afraid of the hardship for her children, she placed my sister and me in a Belgian convent, where only the Mother Superior knew that we were Jewish. My mother tried then to escape to Switzerland. I believe she ended in Auschwitz. Subsequently, a Protestant group took care of us, and we were shuffled from place to place. My sister and I remained together always. On the day of the Battle of the Bulge, the orphanage where we were living was taken over by the Germans. We were all brought down to the cellar and hid, but we could hear the sound of the bombing. Our Liberation Day came on August 1st, 1945. We waited for our parents, but no one came. Finally, my uncle, who had fled with his family into hiding, rode his bicycle to every Belgian orphanage to find us. He found his widowed brother in America, in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and he sent us to live with him. But life here was difficult as well. Even there we experienced anti-Semitism. My uncle remarried, and our very kind stepmother cared for us and brought us up. I moved with my sister to Brooklyn and then to New Jersey, where each of us married. We lived close to one another until recently when I moved to Florida. After 50 years, she returned to Poland and saw the remains and had a horrible feeling. She's been telling her story to children for more than 30 years. Regina Niven, born in Sosnowiec, Poland. I was born and raised in Sosnowiec, Poland, in a wealthy Orthodox family with Jewish servants. I attended a Jewish high school. When the Germans came into Poland at the beginning of the war, they began attacking Jewish businesses, and because my father had a big business, they came looking for him. Our family hid him behind a fake wall, but he was found and murdered. I watched many atrocities committed against Jewish families. I was the only survivor of the 5 children in my family. All of the others perished in Auschwitz. The Germans chose me, even though I was a young child, to do very difficult factory work. A cousin and I were assigned to Grey Bend. This cousin helped to save my life when I was sick by finding help from a man named Dr. Bimko. The doctor made sure that I was employed at all times. As long as I was working, I would not be sent to Auschwitz. My job was to take dead bodies away. As the Germans began to lose the war, I was sent to Bergen-Belsen. I can only credit luck for keeping me alive until the liberation. After liberation, I went to Sweden for recovery and then on to Manchester, England. A family member in Manchester read my story, published by the Red Cross. I lived with my uncle and cousin who also survived. My husband was in the Polish army since he did not look Jewish. I met him at a Purim party while living in Manchester and fell in love. Even my family did not think he was Jewish and asked me not to marry him. My husband told my family about an uncle who was an important rabbi in New York, the dean of Yeshiva University. My family was satisfied, and so we were married. We had 2 sons while living in Manchester, but wanted a better life, and so moved to New York City. Finding work in the city was frustrating until a friend found a job for me as an assistant in a nursery school. I subsequently got a teaching certificate and taught art to children. Regina and her husband now live in Florida, where he became a successful real estate agent. Regina has taught in schools during Holocaust education days. She believes that the key to her own survival was luck. Rana Finder, born in Krakow, Poland. While in New England this past summer, Dr. Siegel researched the internet and found a resource, Facing History and Ourselves. Lillian Fox answered her call and referred her to Rana Finder, who graciously agreed to have her portrait painted. I was 10 years old when the Nazis entered Krakow, Poland, the city in which I lived. My father died in Auschwitz, but my mother and I survived, working as Jewish employees, in the enamel and ammunitions factory owned by Oskar Schindler. Once he saved my life when a German foreman noticed the machine I was working on was broken and was berating me for breaking it. I was the youngest of the factory workers, and Mr. Schindler intervened, saying, "You idiots! This little girl could not break that machine." To all the workers, he was a god. He opened his eyes to see the sadistic murdering of the people, while an indifferent world looked on. As the movie states, he who saves one life saves the world. Oskar Schindler is on record as saving a great number of Jews, 1,200 people, during the Holocaust. He dared what no one else dared. He showed that one man can make a difference. After the war, Oskar Schindler was not successful in business, and the survivors tried to help him. He is buried in Israel. After the war, my mother and I lived in a displaced persons camp, where I met and married Mark Finder, who is also a Holocaust survivor. In 1948, we came to America. Rosalie Lamet, born in Antwerp, Belgium. Antwerp, Belgium, the city where I was born, was known as the City of Diamonds. My father was a citizen of Belgium and a diamond dealer who died when I was 11. During the war, my mother, sister, and brother were deported and died. I knew French very well, and using what I had of ingenuity, determination, arrogance, and beauty, I was able to escape to Vichy, France. In France, I again escaped the Gestapo by denying that I was Jewish. I was smuggled into Switzerland, which became my alpine oasis. I lived out the rest of the war, hidden in Switzerland. I will be forever indebted to the Swiss for my survival. My brothers in New York arranged my passage to America in 1946. I married here and raised a daughter and son. Eventually, I registered for college, taking writing courses at Columbia University. I published 2 books, City of Diamonds and Alpine Oasis, about the courage it took to survive. After suffering through the many years of the Nazi regime, I understood the need to provide assistance for those in need. I started Lamet Hall in Israel to do just that. At Lamet Hall, people who might not be otherwise able to afford such accommodations are welcome to organize and celebrate bar mitzvahs, weddings, and the important times in their lives. I continue to practice orthodoxy. I am a proud grandmother and great-grandmother. I hope to return to Antwerp, my birthplace, where my granddaughter is a physician.
Rose and Jack Beigelman. Both Rose and Jack are Jewish Holocaust survivors. They grew up in Poland and were preteens when the Nazis entered Poland in September 1939. They described their youth until that time as not so different from life here in America. Then, they were forced, first Jack, into the ghetto of Lodz, and Rose into the ghetto of Srodula in Sosnowiec, and then into concentration camps, Jack into Auschwitz, and Rose into Oberallstadt. Both told of the severe tragedy of losing loved ones. Rose was more fortunate than Jack. She was incarcerated with her sisters and they remained alive. All of Jack's family was murdered at Auschwitz. After the war, they were sent as orphans by the United Nations Relief Agency to the Bronx, New York, and later Jack was placed in a foster home in Cleveland, and Rose was placed with relatives also in Cleveland. Each of them married, had children, and after their spouses died and because they were longtime friends, Jack and Rose married. Most of their close friends also were Holocaust survivors, and both Jack and Rose were activists in giving out the word that there should be no hate in the world. They have moved to Florida and once again wish to make the statement that one should not stand in silence when seeing suffering, because someday it might be you in that place. Rose and Jack have been spokespersons for this purpose in schools and in Broward Community College, Florida. They attribute their survival to luck, to staying out of trouble, and to the attitude that tomorrow will be a better day. When we speak to students about the Holocaust, our last statement is, "When my voice will be silent, I want you to speak up for me." When someone denies the Holocaust, I want you to tell them that you met Holocaust survivors and you heard them speak about what happened.
Rosette Goldstein. I was born in Paris, France, to Polish parents who met in an orphanage. My parents had been sent to Germany and later immigrated to France where they married. I was born while my father was in the French army. When the Nazis entered Paris, he was sent to work in a concentration camp. There were 23 concentration camps in France during World War II. He convinced a farm family in the area to hide me. One time, when my mother visited me, My father left camp, and the Nazis came to the farm. My mother fled to Paris, and my father returned to the camp. I never saw him again. The farm family kept me hidden from the Nazi soldiers who came to the farm for food. I was hidden until the end of the war. At that time, my mother took me back to Paris. In 1949, I came to the United States on the ocean liner, Queen Elizabeth. I was 10 years old and came to live with my aunt in Manhattan. My mother came to the United States the following year. She married and then divorced. I found that my father died in Buchenwald after also being in Auschwitz. He helped a man survive, and this man later told me of his bravery. I visited the subcamp of Buchenwald, where my father died, and said Kaddish there. I became a pastry chef in a restaurant, which my son-in-law and I now own. 3 years ago, I went to France and was present at a ceremony to honor the farm family who saved my life. Yad Vashem awarded them the Righteous Gentile Medal. We must hand down the knowledge of the Holocaust to our grandchildren so that it cannot be denied. Rosette Goldstein. I was born in Paris, France, to Polish parents who met in an orphanage. My parents had been sent to Germany and later immigrated to France, where they married. I was born while my father was in the French army. When the Nazis entered Paris, he was sent to work in a concentration camp. There were 23 concentration camps in France during World War II. He convinced a farm family in the area to hide me. One time, when my mother visited me, my father left camp, and the Nazis came to the farm. My mother fled to Paris, and my father returned to the camp. I never saw him again. The farm family kept me hidden from the Nazi soldiers who came to the farm for food. I was hidden until the end of the war. At that time, my mother took me back to Paris. In 1949, I came to the United States on the ocean liner, Queen Elizabeth. I was 10 years old and came to live with my aunt in Manhattan. My mother came to the United States the following year. She married and then divorced. I found that my father died in Buchenwald after also being in Auschwitz. He helped a man survive, and this man later told me of his bravery. I visited the subcamp of Buchenwald, where my father died, and said Kaddish there. I became a pastry chef in a restaurant, which my son-in-law and I now own. 3 years ago, I went to France and was present at a ceremony to honor the farm family who saved my life. Yad Vashem awarded them the Righteous Gentile Medal. We must hand down the knowledge of the Holocaust to our grandchildren so that it cannot be denied. Rosita Ehrlich-Königsberg, second generation. Rosita Ehrlich-Königsberg is the daughter of Holocaust survivor Henry Ehrlich, who was born in Miedzierzek, Poland. When the Nazis came, he was in the ghetto and then was interned in several concentration camps, including Majdanek. He was transferred to Starokovic, the largest ammunitions factory in Poland. From there, he was sent to Auschwitz-Birkenau and then to Buna. In January 1945, he was on a death march and ended up in Dora Mittelbau, where V-2 rockets were made. Finally, he was liberated in Mauthausen in May 1945. After liberation, he married, and his daughter Rosita was born in a displaced persons camp in Austria. The family then immigrated to Montreal, Canada in 1951. Because of the political situation, the family left Montreal and moved to South Florida in 1979. Currently, Rosita serves as the executive vice president of the Holocaust Documentation and Education Center, the organization she has been a part of in various capacities for more than 24 years. She always has been inspired by her father's words. As long as there is someone to tell the story, there is life. And as long as there is someone to listen, there is hope. Today, the center, which began in 1980 as a vision of a few as a living memorial that recorded eyewitness testimony and taught the lessons of the Holocaust to young people, has become a stunningly successful and world-recognized institution. Steven Spielberg's Shoah Foundation, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, the Raoul Wallenberg Project, the Simon Wiesenthal Center, and the United Nations have all sought the center's expertise in developing their oral history projects. One of the profound and compelling achievements of the center, and one of which Rosita is most proud, is the Holocaust Mandate, which ensures that every single Florida student from kindergarten through college and university will be taught Holocaust education. Rosita was the founding chair of the Children of Survivors of South Florida, and from 1983 to 1986, She served as a second-generation advisor to Nobel Prize recipient Elie Wiesel, who, at the time, was chairman of the United States Holocaust Memorial Council on the North American Advisory Board of the March of the Living. In 1996, President Bill Clinton appointed her to serve as a member of the Council of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. Currently, her efforts are focused on the newly acquired facility that will house the first South Florida Holocaust Museum, a legacy of remembrance. This legacy will challenge our present and future generations to learn to appreciate and respect all people, regardless of religion, ethnic background, country of origin, cultural heritage, age, or gender, so that one day we can have harmony and peace. What better way to end this series of paintings than by this statement of a second generation, the daughter of a survivor, which represents the miracle of what happened after the Holocaust. Life Reborn. Ruth Hagen, born in Magdeburg, Germany. I was born in Magdeburg, Germany. My father escaped the pogroms in Poland and moved to Germany in his teens. Later, he married. In 1934, he was stopped in the street and asked to show his papers. Because his first name was Israel, he was arrested and ordered out of town. He was arrested again in 1935, in the town where he had moved our family. At that point, he decided to leave Germany, and he took my mother, brother, sister, and I to Italy. In March 1939, with the help of a smuggler, we crossed the Alps in the middle of the night and moved to France. Several months later, we were caught up in the war. We moved constantly and were always in fear for our lives. My mother always carried jewelry with her in order to have something to trade for food or shelter. In the FA-11 of 1942, again with the help of a smuggler, we crossed the Alps into Switzerland where we were safe. The Swiss did not allow men to come into the country, so my mother, brother, sister, and I stayed there alone. On his third attempt, my father joined us. The Swiss also did not allow children to stay with their mother, so I was sent to various children's camps. We all survived because of my father's ingenuity. We returned to France after the war, and shortly thereafter moved to Italy, where it was easier for Jews to live. I was educated in Italy and studied English before coming to the United States, the land of freedom. Ruth was married and then divorced and has a daughter and a granddaughter. She had a successful career working for Gucci and Fendi in New York. She joined a speakers bureau in both New York and Florida and lectures public school children about the life of the hidden child. I have a strong faith and know I have been saved for a reason. Let people know what happened to us. As a child, I thought people hated me because I was not nice. I know now that is not true. I am nice.
Sam Levitt, raised on Long Island, New York. I am an American Jew, raised in Hicksville, Long Island. I am the eldest of 3 sons, and my parents came to the United States from Russia. While I was in the U.S. Army stationed in Germany, the liberation occurred in Dachau, just outside of Munich. I remember meeting with a number of survivors a short time after their liberation from Dachau and other camps and hearing stories of their horror. A few months later, the most important contact I made was with a survivor I met at a displaced person camp in a town called Feldafing, which was also near the city of Munich. A friend of my parents found out that I was stationed near Feldafing and requested that I bring long-delayed mail to this survivor, a man by the name of Benjamin Appel. Mr. Appel was overjoyed finally to receive these mailings, which represented the first contact that his relatives in America had, a contact that was hindered by an earlier breakdown in mail communication. Later connections that I made with Mr. Appel took place during mid-1945 and early 1946. When it was time for me to leave Germany in April 1946, Mr. Appel prevailed upon me to bring diary notes of his horrible experiences in the camps to his relative in New York. At first I was reluctant to do so for fear of losing these important notes, but later decided it was worth the risk. After being discharged from the Army in the US on April 30th, 1946, having spent 17 months in Europe, I was able to bring the diary notes to Mr. Appel's relatives. Eventually, they turned them over to the Morning Freiheit, a well-known Yiddish newspaper published in New York City. This resulted in a serial publication of the diary in its entirety. The diary now can be found in the archival files of the Center for Jewish History in New York. Mr. Appel, through the sponsorship by his relatives, was able to come to the United States and became an American citizen for the latter part of his life. Samuel Ron. I was born in 1924 in Kazimierza, Poland, as Samuel Rakowski. My father was in the lumber business. I remember anti-Semitism in school. In 1939, when the Germans invaded Poland, I was sent to a concentration camp and spent my youth trying to survive labor camps, hiding, and the ghetto. I spent time in Plaszow, Pionki, Glewen, and Oranienburg-Sachsenhausen. On May 2, 1945, while on a death march near Schwerin, I was liberated by the American Army. My brother died, but my father and mother survived and we came to the United States. I returned to Poland after liberation to search for surviving family and helped to organize the escape Brecha. This plan took survivors of Eastern Europe to Israel, where I lived there from 1945 to 1956. Serving in the army in the War of Liberation. I returned to the United States in 1956 at my parents' request so that we could all be together. For the past 45 years, he lived in Canton, Ohio, where he was engaged in the building and land developing business. He and his wife, Bilha, have 3 children and 4 grandchildren.
Selma Lindenberg, born in Cologne, Germany. I have been married to Benno Lindenberg for 58 years. My family, diamond merchants, lived in Germany, but settled in Antwerp, Belgium. During the war, the diamonds helped to save our lives. I spent my youth playing the piano and became a concert pianist at a young age. I was very shy, but my sister invited me to go to a youth group meeting where I had my first kiss by Benno. I was married, but my first husband was sent to Auschwitz and never returned. My family survived despite separation. My sister and I survived together. In Grenoble, French peasants helped to save our lives when we came up against the Gestapo. Since we spoke Flemish, we pretended to be what the Germans called stupid Belgian cows. We were left alone. Our family was reunited in Paris, and one day in a cafe I met Benno again, and our romance really began. We were married and my father taught him the diamond business. Benno and Selma have 4 grandchildren. Their first child, Danny, had a birth defect, and he is mentally challenged and lives successfully in a special group home in New York City. His birth defect brought them to the United States, and they are grateful to him for starting a very successful life here. They have 2 other sons, who are also very successful, and life is good. Selma Lindenberg, born in Cologne, Germany. I have been married to Benno Lindenberg for 58 years. My family, diamond merchants, lived in Germany, but settled in Antwerp, Belgium. During the war, the diamonds helped to save our lives. I spent my youth playing the piano and became a concert pianist at a young age. I was very shy, but my sister invited me to go to a youth group meeting where I had my first kiss by Benno. I was married, but my first husband was sent to Auschwitz and never returned. My family survived despite separation. My sister and I survived together. In Grenoble, French peasants helped to save our lives when we came up against the Gestapo. Since we spoke Flemish, we pretended to be what the Germans called stupid Belgian cows. We were left alone. Our family was reunited in Paris, and one day in a cafe I met Benno again, and our romance really began. We were married and my father taught him the diamond business. Benno and Selma have 4 grandchildren. Their first child, Danny, had a birth defect, and he is mentally challenged and lives successfully in a special group home in New York City. His birth defect brought them to the United States, and they are grateful to him for starting a very successful life here. They have 2 other sons, who are also very successful, and life is good.
Stefan Newman. Of the 90 people in his family, Stefan Newman is the sole survivor. When I was 17 years old, the Germans came to where we lived in the Warsaw Ghetto. After a year and a half, we were taken into a stadium and put through a selection process. My father and mother instructed me to stay away from us, go over there. These are the words that saved my life. I was placed in many different work camps in Poland, even in Auschwitz, where Josef Mengele was cruelly in charge, but moved from there to a new work camp. I attribute my survival to the skills and the attitudes I learned from hard-edged criminals in the camps. I met my wife, Rosalie, in Heidelberg after liberation. We came to the States and settled in Omaha, Nebraska, where I became a successful upholsterer. I did all of the upholstery for the 3 synagogues there. I never shared my history of the Holocaust with my children, as I did not want to burden them. Stefan recently has moved to Florida and is active with the Holocaust group of the center. In the background are pictures of his late wife himself and his late granddaughter. He has spoken with Steven Spielberg for his Shoah Foundation.
Susanne Obrand. Dr. Siegel met Suzanne at a Weizmann Institute of Israel luncheon, where Suzanne's daughter Shelley was being honored. Dr. Siegel subsequently did portraits of them both and learned the story of Suzanne, who was a hidden child in Belgium during the Holocaust. Noting the rise of anti-Semitism, my mother left Romania and moved to Belgium in the early 1930s. My father left Poland and moved to Belgium as well. There he met my mother, and together they became Belgian citizens. When the Germans entered Belgium, the government protected their Jewish citizens, but we were required to wear the yellow star. However, in spite of the government's efforts, as the war progressed, the Germans began to round up the Jews and take them to encampments. Attempting to protect our family, my parents sold their jewelry, bought a house, then gave the house to a Gentile couple and hid in the attic. They sent my brother and me to 2 different nunneries to hide. On one occasion, my father went to Marseille, France, with a group of male relatives to find a place of hiding for their families. While they were in the train station, my father saw the Gestapo and hid. All of the others were sent off to concentration camp and only he survived. I was very young, but I remember being a victim of anti-Semitism whenever I wore the star. Though once in the nunnery, I never experienced it. I remember being baptized. My parents made it clear that this was only for protection and that I would always be Jewish. My immediate family all survived despite all the fears. An uncle from Canada came to visit after the war and brought us to Montreal, where I grew up and married. My husband was the owner of a very successful Radio Shack in Florida. He died 5 years ago of lung cancer. We have 2 children. My son became a vascular surgeon practicing in Montreal, and my daughter, Shelley, is an adult affected by muscular dystrophy. She is an education program director at Nova Southeastern University of Broward County and an inspiration for Jerry Lewis's kids. Susanna's survival has taught her how to cope in life with its difficulties. In the background are photographs of her daughter Shelley, Jerry Lewis with Shelley, Suzanne's husband, her dog Shushu, and other family members. Susanne Obrand. Dr. Siegel met Suzanne at a Weizmann Institute of Israel luncheon, where Suzanne's daughter Shelley was being honored. Dr. Siegel subsequently did portraits of them both and learned the story of Suzanne, who was a hidden child in Belgium during the Holocaust. Noting the rise of anti-Semitism, my mother left Romania and moved to Belgium in the early 1930s. My father left Poland and moved to Belgium as well. There he met my mother, and together they became Belgian citizens. When the Germans entered Belgium, the government protected their Jewish citizens, but we were required to wear the yellow star. However, in spite of the government's efforts, as the war progressed, the Germans began to round up the Jews and take them to encampments. Attempting to protect our family, my parents sold their jewelry, bought a house, then gave the house to a Gentile couple and hid in the attic. They sent my brother and me to 2 different nunneries to hide. On one occasion, my father went to Marseille, France, with a group of male relatives to find a place of hiding for their families. While they were in the train station, my father saw the Gestapo and hid. All of the others were sent off to concentration camp and only he survived. I was very young, but I remember being a victim of anti-Semitism whenever I wore the star. Though once in the nunnery, I never experienced it. I remember being baptized. My parents made it clear that this was only for protection and that I would always be Jewish. My immediate family all survived despite all the fears. An uncle from Canada came to visit after the war and brought us to Montreal, where I grew up and married. My husband was the owner of a very successful Radio Shack in Florida. He died 5 years ago of lung cancer. We have 2 children. My son became a vascular surgeon practicing in Montreal, and my daughter, Shelley, is an adult affected by muscular dystrophy. She is an education program director at Nova Southeastern University of Broward County and an inspiration for Jerry Lewis's kids. Susanna's survival has taught her how to cope in life with its difficulties. In the background are photographs of her daughter, Shelley, Jerry Lewis with Shelley, Suzanne's husband, her dog, Shoo Shoo, and other family members. Therese Bender, born in Ilva, Romania. I was born in Romania to a family of 5 children. All 5 children survived the Holocaust. The rest of our family perished. My father was in the lumber business and was very religious. When the Nazis took him, he wanted to take his tallis, but they would not allow it. When my brother returned to our home, he found that the Germans had hung the tallit as curtains. This still makes me weep to this day. My brother then took the tallit with him to Israel. My 2 sisters and I were taken first to Auschwitz, then on to 2 other work camps, and finally to Bergen-Belsen. My older sister saved me by encouraging me, telling me to keep going, that we would make it through to the end. At Liberation, our brothers, who were in other concentration camps, were finally reunited with us. I found employment with the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee and came to America. I became a successful real estate agent and supported my children after my divorce.
Victor Cinnamon, born in Lublin, Poland. My family and I were living in Poland on September 1st, 1939, when the Nazis marched into our homeland. We were stripped of all of our possessions and first moved to a ghetto. From there, I was conveyed to a number of labor camps, and then to the Majdanek death camp. More people died at Majdanek than at Auschwitz. Only a few hundred people survived. I was one of them. From there, I went to labor at a munitions factory, then to Buchenwald, and on to another munitions factory. I was severely injured. A Belgian doctor, a righteous Gentile, saved my life, and I will always be grateful to him. I survived the Allied bombing only to be sent to Theresienstadt in Czechoslovakia, from which I was liberated by the Russians. After liberation, I tried to return to my hometown but found I was not welcome. There I met my wife and we moved together to a displaced persons camp in Germany. We married, moved to the United States, and had a baby. After settling in the Bronx, I had a very successful building business. I am now retired and living in Florida. I am the vice president of the Aventura Turnberry Jewish Center and chairman of the Holocaust Memorial Committee. My brother and sister survived the Holocaust as well. I have dedicated my retirement years to the cause of remembrance. This series of portraits will serve as a witness after the survivors are gone and will teach the world that if they are not vigilant, it can happen to anyone, anywhere. All through the camps, until I was separated from him in November 1942 for the last time, my father commanded me over and over to survive.
Walter Freshman. I was born in Będzin, Poland. I was an only child and my father was in the lumber business. I remember the Gestapo coming into town and rounding up the people. My mother realized that I might be sent off to die and had me stand on a rock so that I would look older than my 13 years. I was pulled for the labor camp instead of being sent to my death. In the camp, I learned quickly how to stay alive by my own instincts. My mother and I both survived. I was liberated from the Reichenbach labor camp by the Russians on May 8, 1945. From there I was moved to Feldafing outside of Munich. I applied through the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, CHIAS, to come to the United States. An uncle in the States who had no children helped me to get a job in his factory. I knew very little about the business, so I attended the Fashion Institute of Technology. Eventually I was able to take over the business and we were very successful.